All right, so now we're gonna dive into the different types of stories that we all tell ourselves. And I'm gonna break this down into two different parts. The first stories that we tell ourselves are about who we are and what we're capable of. And the second stories that we tell ourselves are the ones about what is possible in the world and what is possible for our life, right? And these different stories are constructed and we pick them up throughout our life from different situations, a few of them being from childhood, a lot of them being from childhood, a lot of them being from the environment that we're in right now, and a lot of them being from our own energy and our own thoughts that we're not shifting and aligning out of things that we don't actually believe into what we do believe, right? So there's three different types of energy stories that we tell ourselves, but they're about, one, ourselves, what we're capable of, and about the world that we're allowed and that exists that we can live in. So these stories first started when we were younger, right? The first stories that we believe to be true are the ones we picked up from our family and the environment that we were raised in. And we didn't really have much control over that, right? So say you grew up Christian. You grew up Christian because your family was Christian, right? Most likely, unless you had this idea and your family supported it. But most likely you grew up with the ideas that you have and the beliefs that you have and the stories that you were shown from your environment growing up. You thought that was true. So for example, I didn't come from a family that had a lot of financial abundance. We always had enough to get by, but we always fought about money. There was never enough of it. It was always like a tense thing. We always would like spend it and then we would like fight about it and worry about it, and we were borrowing it from family and friends, and it was just never a financially abundant situation that I was in. So I had this belief based on that story that I was told that money is always in lack, that I'm never gonna have money in abundance. And another story that I picked up from everybody that I knew was that if I did want to have an abundance of money, I had to work really, really hard for it. I had to go to college and I had to get a degree and I had to be a doctor or a lawyer or something with a really high paying profession. And if that wasn't the way that I did, if I didn't follow that one path, that I couldn't have financial abundance, because that's a story that I was told. I'd only ever seen that, so I didn't know it was possible to live another way. So that story became a belief. And I graduated high school and I was like, okay, well, I have to go to college and I have to get a good job, otherwise I'm not going to be able to afford anything in my life, and I want to travel and I want to, you know, be able to do these things with my life. And it created this huge inner conflict of like my soul compass, my heart compass didn't want that, but my mind told me that's the only story that's possible, right? And it's not a story that I created, it's one that I picked up, right? And that's how a lot of our stories happen. They're not ones that we create ourselves, they're ones that we pick up from different places and different people and different situations throughout our entire life, and we just claim them as our own, right? We're stuck in the spin cycle of this is what we're supposed to do. We have society's stories that we pick up about how we're supposed to live, what we're capable of, and the right way to do things. And instead of questioning those stories and saying, hey, there's other ways of doing this, and I don't want this to be my story just because it's your story. I want to create my own story, right? But we don't ever take the time and believe in ourselves enough and separate enough from those stories to remind ourselves that we get to create our own. We really do. Just because someone else's story is someone else's story doesn't mean it has to be your story. And there's no one way to live, there's just your way to live. And the beauty in it is that we get to decide. So once we separate from the stories and we can say, this story is one that I picked up, this story is one that I've been told for a really long time, but it's no longer a story that I want to believe, right? Because you have to think about, what is your result line? What is your goal, right? What are the things that you see for yourself? What stories have to be true for that to exist, right? So if I want to be financially abundant and I want to be making $10,000 a month, that's my result line, right? In a year's time, I will be making 10K a month. I believe that, I feel that. I have to believe that the story is that it's possible to be financially abundant at 25. That I will be completely financially abundant at 25. I have to believe that story, that it's possible, that I don't have to have a degree, I don't have to be working for somebody else, I don't have to be trading my time for money. I have to believe in that new story and write that new story for that reality to exist. Because if I believed the story that I had to be working a 9 to 5 and I had to be working for somebody else and I had to have a college degree, I wouldn't be able to reach my result line the way that I want to, right? Not with my own story, right? So think for a minute about all of the stories that you're telling yourself, right? All the stories that you're telling yourself. Maybe you're telling yourself the story, maybe someone told you when you were in school that you weren't smart enough, that you weren't going to be successful. Did you believe that story? Are you still holding on to that story? When you think about your dreams, do you think about that and say, but I'm not smart enough. I'm not qualified enough. I don't have a degree. I don't have the support. I don't have the finances, right? Those are all stories that you tell yourself. And remember, your belief system is your thoughts, right? And your thoughts create your emotions, and that creates your action, and that's going to create your result. So we have to think differently. We have to change the stories that don't match with what we want, right? And it comes first with recognizing 100 emotions, recognizing all of the stories that we're telling ourselves, right? I had another story that men are not reliable because, and I love my dad, I love him to death. He's an amazing man, but his job was always fluctuating, and my mom was always fighting about money and fighting about the bills, and he never had it, and he didn't want to put it in the bank, and it was just this like super weird, confusing relationship that he had with money, right? So I had this story in my mind that men are not stable. They're not financially stable. I didn't know any man in my life that was financially stable. So it created the story that if I was going to be successful, if I was going to have children, I had to make all the money, that I could never rely on somebody else, that I could never rely on a partner to make it 50-50, that I could never, I didn't believe in marriage, because every marriage that I saw, they were fighting, and it was just this weird attachment and controlment over one another. It wasn't really a union and a partnership and teamwork, right? So for the longest time, I was like against marriage, and I'm still kind of working through that story. I still don't really know how I feel about that, right? But I'm able to see now that that's a story that I told myself, that marriage doesn't need to be this, like, you're giving away all your freedom, right? So all my relationships, I've been very detached. I've been very detached, and I've had all these walls, and I only ever let myself get so close because I had this story in my mind that I told myself, that I made into a belief based on my environment around me. It wasn't my belief, right? It's just one that I picked up and I carried and told myself as if I had written it myself, that if I'm with someone, or I'm married, or I try to rely on somebody, that it's not gonna work, that it's not gonna be in flow, that it's not gonna be abundant, that there's gonna be hardships, there's gonna be arguments, that I'm gonna lose myself, that I'm not gonna have freedom, that I'm gonna be controlled, right? And that's then caused me to have relationships that make me feel that way, because I've believed that that was the way that it had to be, right? And I had this other story, back to the money story. I had this story that men are not financially stable, right? So in all of my relationships, I've seen men as not financially stable, and it's put this weird pressure on me, but I never talked about it. We never talked about it because it was just a story. I believe that that's how it was, right? But then that caused so much tension in my relationship, and the relationships were like fiery and like crazy, and they never blossomed the way that they could have, and I never got connected enough to my partner the way that I could have, because of all these stories that I was telling myself about how it had to be and what was normal, right? But those aren't actually true. They're just stories I picked up from somebody else's life, right? So think for a minute about all of the stories that you tell yourself. What do you believe to be true? Maybe you want to network with people, and maybe you want to have a team of people, or maybe you want to be a coach, right? And you want to have a team of people, like-minded people that get it, and that you're working together and you're thriving together and you're growing together. But maybe you have this story that you don't work well with people. Do you see how conflicting that is? Because I had that story. I had this story in my mind that I told myself from high school, that I don't get along with girls. I just don't get along with girls. They're bratty, they're condescending, they're catty, like all they do is gossip, like I have nothing in common with them, right? So when I decided to transition my life and become a coach and work with people and a lot of them were girls, I had this conflict of like, I want to work with you and I want to trust with you and I want to collaborate, but I always felt like we were in competition and that we were never really connecting the way that like I wanted to, and that I knew I had to be like a genuine coach for them. And I recognized that that was a story I was telling myself, and I'd picked it up from high school, because in high school I didn't connect well with girls, right? And that was just high school, right? And then I had a 9-to-5 job where the girls that I was working with, like, they just gossiped all the time and they never did their work, and they just came to work and they sat around and they did nothing. And I had this mindset and this story that if I really wanted to get shit done, I really wanted to build something, like I had to do it on my own, and I couldn't rely on another girl or a teammate or a community to make it work, because it just didn't work like that, right? That's just not how it was, right? But now I've reworked that story and I've let go, I've shed that story, and I've created a new one that women are empowering. And the more women on my team, the bigger and better and more badass it is, because women understand me. And women are so honest and open and willing to grow and in tune with themselves and passionate, right? And now I see a woman and I do not think I'm in competition with her. I'm like rooting for her more than I have ever rooted for anything in my life. And it's allowed me to like let go of these blocks within my business and connect and network and grow a team and have a tribe, and not have all these self-sabotaging thoughts that women, we just don't click, right? So think about what your result line is. Think about the goals that you have and the person that you want to be. Think about that, truly, like feel into that, right? Connect to that. Really, really connect with that, and think about what stories have to be true for that to happen, right? I have to believe, and I have to believe in the story and tell myself the story and connect to the story that I make 10K a month, and that I have a massive team and tribe of people and hustlers and entrepreneurs and soulpreneurs who are growing their passions in aligned ways, and they're leaving the 9-to-5 and they're living on their terms, and they're never sacrificing their happiness for a paycheck. I have to believe that 100% and know that every detail of that story is the story that I created and I want to believe, not from somebody else, right? For example, my grandma thinks that this is crazy. She thinks that she supports me and she loves me, but she thinks that nobody would buy this course. She doesn't understand why anybody would buy something like this. Like, what's the point? It's all hippy dippy, like it just doesn't make any sense, right? And that's a story that she has. If I believed her story, I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here. This would not be happening. So do you see the importance of creating your own stories and really understanding that just because it's somebody else's story doesn't mean that it has to be your story? And there's so much power in separating that and creating your own, right? Think about if you just bought this shirt, right? You just bought this super cool, cute, linen, boho, totally ethical shirt, right? And you love it, like you love it, right? And that's the story you tell yourself, that it's super friendly for the environment, no animals were harmed, it's vegan, and you freaking love it. It's the cutest thing ever, right? And then you get home and your brother's like, oh my God, that is the ugliest shirt I've ever seen in my life. Like, go burn it. In this moment right now, you have a choice. What story best suits you? His story that the shirt is ugly and you just wasted your money, or your story that it's ethical, it's beautiful, and you love it? You get to decide.